I want to talk about the concern that we have as members of OCL, and which many of you share, and that is the breakdown in something which is very important in our church, and that is the concept of syndiakonia, or conciliarity. And I think that has been the traditional way that the church has progressed in the United States. And that is that there's always been a balance between hierarchs, clergy, and laypersons in the governance of the church. Now, I'm not talking about spiritual matters at all. And we would not presume to enter into that discussion. It's inappropriate for us, and there's no problem with our spiritual concerns. What we're talking about is the way the church is governed and administered in the United States. We have great concern about that. And I think that there's been a breakdown in that syndiakonia, and we have to figure out a way to correct the breakdown, to get the balance back to where it's going to be. I'm going to just make one brief statement about syndiakonia and the situation, and it's from a book written by the Reverend John Karcazes, who many of you know. It's taken from Obedience and Authority, Dimensions of a Hierarchical Church. It's not a book, it's a long article that he wrote. And he said, ecclesiastical authority must be seen in terms of service and not rule, in relation to diakonia and syndiakonia and dialogue, not domination. In other words, in order for this, however, to occur, the faithful must be regarded as gifted people of God and not manipulated as objects or sheep to be taken for granted. And I'm afraid that what's happened is that we've been taken for granted, and in fact we are manipulated as sheep. I don't think that we're being dealt with as thinking human beings who have a logical input to make in the situation. Our hierarchs have chosen not to share information, have not invited us to participate in a discussion, and simply have chosen to move forward by fiat. And that's what we're objecting to. I think I want to clarify something, and that is that there's a lot of confusion about the history of the charters of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in the United States. Yes, we have had 4 different charters, 1922, 1927, 1931, and 1977, each one of which has been approved and accepted by a clergy laity congress of the Archdiocese, in addition to also having been approved by the Patriarchate. The first charter, adopted in 1922, provided for what is known as an autonomous archdiocese. So the first charter which established our archdiocese, in effect, created an autonomous Greek Orthodox archdiocese. Now, sometimes people get mixed up between what is autonomous and what is autocephalous. Autocephalous Orthodox churches are churches which are totally independent and have their own religious leader, which is selected from within that church without the approval of anybody else. Autonomous means that the church selects its own bishops, sets its own governance, but its leader, in the case of the Greek Orthodox Church in the United States, the Archbishop, whoever it may be, is selected or approved by the Patriarchate from a list of names of candidates submitted to the Patriarchate of whichever that church belongs to. And in our case, it's the Patriarchate of Constantinople. So the Charter of 1922 created an autonomous church. That means it governed itself by electing its own bishops and making its own decisions without any required approval by the Patriarchate. Subject to ratification by the Patriarchate, it also elected its own archbishop. The second charter, which was approved in 1927, was essentially the same as the 1922 charter with only some minor adjustments. So my daughter says, sounds to me like we're going in the right direction. So what happened next? Unfortunately, as a result of extensive turmoil and problems which developed in the Archdiocese in the late 20s and early 30s, stemming in large measure from political problems in Greece, the Archdiocese lost its self-rule, and under the 1931 charter, it became an eparchy, or province of the Patriarchate. And eparchy comes from what? Greek word, which is eparchy, right? Eparchy. Eparchia, but that comes from the verb eparchy, and that verb means what? To belong to or a possession of somebody else, right? So, became an eparchy of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Clergy Laity Congress decisions were subject to patriarchal approval, and its archbishop was the sole bishop with episcopal power and was elected by the Patriarchate. And when that charter was put in force in 1931, of course, the archbishop was Athenagoras, time of turmoil in the United States, and he played an important role in calming the confusions that occurred here. The 1977 charter was adopted to decentralize the cumbersome administrative system of the archdiocese put in place under the 1931 charter by restoring a synodical system, which means that the bishop presided over a synod, a group of local bishops who were directly responsible to him. It also recognized and implemented the historic role of the laity in the archdiocesan governance by providing for shared and limited responsibility of hierarchs, clergy and laity in decision-making, and by expanding the responsibilities of the Clergy Laity Congress and the Archdiocesan Council. Now, in a little while, Mr. Chris, I believe, will talk about exactly what differences there are between the Charter of 1977 and the Charter under issue at the present time in terms of governance, issues of governance and responsibilities. In order to better serve the needs of its communicants and to successfully meet the challenges facing it in the 21st century, Archbishop Iacobos and his advisors felt it was necessary that the Archdiocese have a greater degree of self-governance. Accordingly, now you may know this history because it's more recent. Accordingly, in May 1995, His Eminence appointed an ad hoc charter committee which prepared and submitted to the Synod of Bishops and the Archdiocesan Council for review the draft of an amended 1977 charter. The draft provided for an autonomous archdiocese under the spiritual jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarch. However, before there was any consideration or review, the proposed draft was denounced by the Patriarchate as an uncanonical and secular fabrication. There are also threats of proper canonical sanctions if it was not immediately withdrawn. Unfortunately, the GOA bowed to the threats of Istanbul, and further charter revision was not pursued. The Patriarchate was successful in derailing any attempt of autonomy for the GOA, and in 1996, Archbishop Iacobos was dismissed, and a time of troubles that began for archdioceses in the United States. In the year 2000, the Archdiocese submitted to the Patriarchate a proposed charter prepared by an archdiocesan committee appointed by Archbishop Demetrius, which had some aspects of a semi-autonomous archdiocese. However, it was also rejected by the Patriarchate. Following that, a joint patriarchal and archdiocesan committee drafted the 2001 Joint Draft Charter, which by reason of the many amendments and modifications proposed to it was in effect rejected in its form by the 2002 Clergy Laity Congress. And I'm sure you all recollect that meeting which took place in Los Angeles and all the amendments that were made and the fact that they were rejected. The purported charter, the one that's been issued by the Patriarchate, imposed in January 2003, is essentially the same as the rejected 2001 joint draft. So, those are the four charters. 1922, we started with autonomy, which was prepared by a group of hierarchs, lay people and clergy in New York, and by the Archbishop who had been sent from Greece at that time, who later himself was elected to become Ecumenical Patriarch. I think his name was Meletios, right? Then 1927, that charter was still in effect with some minor revisions. 1931, the whole thing was overturned and we reverted back to a different kind of system of operation and a different relationship. 1977, that relationship was modified to provide for a greater degree of syndiakonia. The attempts afterwards to get back to where we were in 1922 have been rejected, and we reached the point of standoff where we are now, and which our other speakers will address.